Hi, everybody. Welcome to Town Hall again. Thanks for joining us. Today, we have with us Sai Krishna. Sai is the co founder and CEO of Scapic. Scapic, who's now acquired by Flipkart. So, there is going to be a lot of things that we are going to discuss with Sai today. And this particular town hall is dedicated to AR and VR, since that is Sai's area of expertise. And we want to particularly go to the critique of the industry, where it is right now, what all do we need to understand about the industry, where we are, where do we see where we are going, and how much time it is going to take, and also a little bit of details about probably what Scapic is doing and how are things with Flipkart and Scapic now. So without further much ado, we have with us Sai. Hi Sai, welcome to the town hall.
Thank you so much for having me at the episode.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been meaning to talk to you for a long time, and this has been pending. So our apologies, and thanks for coming on board.
So excited to get this rolling in the first place. Not often do we get to have podcasts where we tend to geek out about augmented reality and virtual reality. So I'm
Yeah,
coming at it with a vein of excitement as always.
yeah. Tell me about it.
We know you because we keep following the news and everything, but for people who don't know, like my father or my mother, so what do you do in just quick brief intro about yourself?
For sure. Uh, for starters, my name is Sai, and I'm sort of your textbook definition of an accidental entrepreneur. Most of you might have heard of what a one trick pony is. I usually consider myself to be a three trick pony per se. And what are those tricks is building either teams,
Yeah.
products, or eventually early stage startups. My journey started all the way back in engineering undergrad, where we sort of go through our own amount of strife, if I may put it so, in terms of engineering entrance examinations. Do well,
Yeah.
not well. You sort of have a broad spectrum, and then you start out with your engineering colleges. I was no
Yeah.
different. It took me the first year of college to realize the next three is not going to be high yield, if I may say so. Right. So I quickly realized if I were to, the only way you have some sort of an impact across your engineering undergrad is if you end up doing something that's contrarian, and hopefully you're right about it as well. Um, I had a lot of luck, a lot of serendipity, and a lot of good people around me in terms of just helping me identify and pursue ideas that I thought were exciting back in the day. Now, these were small college side projects in their earliest forms and beings, but very quickly we noticed an opportunity in the edtech space and built our first startup around the same. We scaled that to more than 12,000 students, where we used to supply white labeled learning management systems. So that's where I cut my teeth in terms of understanding what does it take in order to not just think about an idea, but rather try building, as well as eventually, more importantly, selling that to an audience who cares about it.
Yeah.
I took my learnings from there, went on to then subsequently build my second firm in the hyperlocal delivery space. And our goal was to probably be a thin chat layer that makes it easy for you to text a request in, and that's then subsequently fulfilled by a number of fulfillment partners or delivery centers. Not very different from what all the hyperlocal services you might be using if you are in, say, Bangalore today. Um, we definitely had a lot of fun while building it, but also it's an aggressive unit economics game. Learned a lot through that process, and right after had a small stint in business school. And through business school, you realize the only way you're going to make your technology knowledge work is if you're going to attempt something at the deep end of things, where you can start taking a 3 year, 5 year, 7 year time horizon view. Right. And before this, I used to be a kid chasing shiny toys, right? Like this sector is cool, this idea is cool, you got to go build it. Now you start thinking about company building as a lot more of a rational science as compared to a pure by heart play. And that's where I started. And I realized if I were to make the early parts of my 20s count, there a sector that I could definitely look to build some amount of competency at is the world of virtual reality and augmented reality, spatial computing, as we call it as. Now, this is fast forwarding to circa 2018, and that's around when Scapic got up and running. I lucked out with an incredible co-founder in Ajay. So even to this day, I would continue to argue that Ajay does all the hard things at Scapic that allows me to do the things I do. And between me, Ajay, Akash, and a small team, we sort of really indexed on smaller units are capable of working harder and thereby creating some fungible impact. And that's really what Scapic has been over the last 2.5 years through
Yeah.
building a no-code augmented reality platform, and now eventually with its exit to Flipkart as well. Now that's the journey in a nutshell, if I were to say so.
Just so that everybody knows, like what is Capic? What does Capic do? What is a no code editor, AR/VR editor?
So for sure, Pratham's really going into the jargon now. Uh,
Yeah.
and that's the thing here, which is when you start with virtual reality, augmented reality, you're thrown into the deep end of things pretty quick, right? How do these technologies even work? What's even the difference between VR, AR, MR, XR? It starts to get a little expansive, if I were to say so. The one thing that we realized consistently from when we started building Scapic was the people who wanted to do something in this space, which is considered the technology cool and wanted to be part of that narrative, were very different from the people who had the ability to do something in this space. What do I mean by that? Is who was really excited about virtual reality and augmented reality? These were creators, artists, and folks across in product marketing or product informational roles where they wanted to tell a story. It's a storytelling medium at the end of the day. Now, who are the ones who are able to build this out for you if you're excited about a storytelling medium? A developer, an engineer, an architect. Every time we want content, we are looking at software as the way that the content development is happening. You don't do that when you write a blog, right? You don't do that when you record a podcast. You're not writing the software that houses an MP3 file. You're not writing the underpinnings of a video chat software each time. You're generating content as a content development workflow. But the moment you talk about VR and AR, it becomes a software development workflow. Suddenly, it's the developer's job in order to do this. We saw a huge sort of valley there in terms of plugging a gap in. Authoring content could be simpler. So, in a nutshell, Scapic is a no code content authoring tool which lets you build augmented reality, 3D, and virtual reality experiences if you're a brand or a business. Why is this useful? Is because suddenly your marketing guy or the product manager or eventually somebody prototyping an idea sitting inside that company no longer needs to schedule this out on a 3 month development life cycle with a budget which is going to have a failure rate which is pretty high in delta. You'd rather just log on to Scapic, prototype what you want, put it out there, test it quickly, and you're able to move forward. We saw a lot of success around other tools around us. A Canva on one side, right? Like which is you have a Photoshop expert on one front, but at the same point of time, you have smaller mom and pop businesses that require graphic design as a key part of their workflow. Canva comes in. So every time there's a tool for a professional, there's always been a market for moving that tool downstream. Now, this could start with writing a blog where you could set up your own blogs per se on Ghost, or having a medium or having a blogging website where you go do it as. Moving technology downstream has always been a safe bet in terms of how technology has happened. Now, we thought and we continue to believe that that's a very important way that AR and VR can spread to the masses. And to make that happen is really where Scapic started.
But that is not where Scapic found its product market fit. It took about 2 years, and I think the last year is when you start seeing major traction, right? So, what happened between the no code editor to where Scapic is today?
You're completely right, Pratham. I think any company that has the path to product market fit as a straight line is doing something wrong. At its core, we think product market fit is that time where you have more customers than your product is inherently built to handle at that stage of the company. And eventually, you sort of are able to find a way to not just score, but also understand if you're building a virtuous cycle where one customer is sort of going and propagating this to n number, and that n number being the higher it is, the better it is for you. So word of mouth coupled with a strong product, coupled with customers who are sticky and willing to pay, is almost like the Goldilocks zone for any startup to exist at. We weren't there in that Goldilocks zone for a considerable period of time. What we started off as right at the beginning of Scapic's days was a virtual reality editor where you could build 360-degree scenes or VR experiences and throw that out there to someone else. Now, the whole thesis is built and predicated on the fact that you have access to VR hardware, right? Like, if I'm building a software company around virtual reality, and the base assumption that I need to make is virtual reality as an industry takes off, and by virtue of which you have hardware that's going to enable me to equip you with really cool use cases, right? An
Yep.
Angry Birds as a game is only as good as the number of iPhones that were out there back in 2008.
Correct.
So it's a chicken and egg problem, if I were to say so. Now, in that chicken and egg, our punt was the fact that VR takes off. Now, VR is definitely taking a lot longer in order to hit the ground to the volume that mandates software companies to exist around it like a mushrooming ecosystem. What does that mean? Long story short is it's taking longer than we thought, right? And we quickly realized that as a startup, we have months of survival and not years, let alone decades, that we can have a far sight into the future at. Now that means that the clock's ticking. There's a product out there. Customers are not willing to pay because the chicken and egg has not gotten solved. Now, in between this, what we realized was an easy slash linear way for us to unlock more value was to go after customers where they are at right now, which is the things that we carry in our pockets, the rectangular glass slabs almost all the time, your smartphones. And it was during this time that things like Pokemon Go, as well as Apple launching AR Kit, there were some very big moves in the AR industry that definitely can't go unnoticed. Let me put it that way. So there are three things that led to a perfect storm. AR is available on your phone. AR is backed by large organizations as much as VR is. And more importantly, the momentum in terms of unlocking value seems far higher in AR at that point of time. So we decided to flip the switch and enable augmented reality as the core value proposition of the platform, because these are ancillary but not the same technologies for what it is. Now, but even after doing that, you're still having a leaky bucket, right? A leaky bucket
Hmm.
where people are excited, they want to jump right in, build an augmented reality experience. In fact, one of our most popular AR experiences was a bunch of Christmas cards that people would end up creating around 2018 December. So people want it, people are using it, but who's going to pay, right? It's again a leaky bucket where the ability to make you plonk your credit card out is just tougher than ever. So the third part is when we hit more than 50,000 odd users generating hundreds of thousands of experiences, that we started to realize that there is a common theme that is occurring across all the people who are sticky, who keep coming back, our most loyal customers per se. When we dug a little deeper, we quickly found out that this persona or this type of a customer is a very peculiar but specific one. He or she is either looking to market a product to their customers or looking to sell a product to their customers. So everything revolved around a physical product, throwing it out in augmented reality, and either making you buy it or making you more biased towards buying it. And now that really had a bit of a moment for us because we realized at the end of the day, product commerce alone is a $1 trillion industry globally. Product returns alone is more than a $250 billion industry in terms of you not liking the thing that you bought. It could be a couch, it could be a dress, it could be a sneaker that you decide to give back because you're just not happy about it. So these are large TAMs. Now, from a point where we had to search and justify why a Christmas card makes sense in augmented reality, to a point where it's much easier to showcase the couch or the shoe in AR and then tell you that you need to be making that purchase, became a natural progression for us. Around this time, interestingly, was when Google also started to integrate a number of other initiatives like augmented reality animals on the search result, augmented reality ads, 3D ads, so on and so forth. So we had a little bit of a perfect storm again in terms of AR having the momentum that we thought it would, the ability for the Scapic platform to reach a niche audience, which is the e-commerce product manager, the e-commerce marketing teams, or the sales teams, and a SaaS tool operating in a deep tech space, which was hard to come by. Right? SaaS products are usually around add a widget, button, functionality to your existing products per se. SaaS is a thin layer adorned on top of the other more often than not. Deep tech products, on the other hand, are fatty by inherent nature. You can't build a self-driving car while you supply only the steering wheel, right? You got to build a Zoox. You inevitably go for home runs more often than not in the deep tech space. But a SaaS product operating in the deep tech space is slightly tougher in order to niche out as a platform. So we had that going for us. We decided to double down on that focus, and that's really eventually where we found our product market fit as a path towards scaling what could be the next big play in terms of the camera meeting e-commerce use cases, and how do you club these two together for larger and mid-sized organizations to make sure that their product experiences can be sort of little above the ordinary per se.
So would you say that like most consumers would not even regard this as AR, right? Just watching animal springing up on your in your mobile phone, or maybe using a filter somewhere on the web, or maybe Facebook's uh, camera platform or Snapchat's camera platform. So would you regard yourself no longer as a AR/VR company, but rather an e-commerce company? Would that be a good understanding for a lay consumer like us?
It's a very interesting lens to view it as, no puns intended. But at the very core, we are sort of going after two problem statements. If I look at it as, let's sort of look at it from the angle of what's the job that's to be done, right? At our very core, we think buying is a function of seeing, right? Like any product needs look, feel, touch. Let me sort of put it in that order of familiarity. You look at an object, you want to get a sense of how big it is, how cool it looks, etc. And then eventually you want to wrap your hands around it, or just ensure that you're able to get a sense of what it is before making the purchase. Now that's great in the offline world. In the online world, you get a grid of items. You really can't do any of this. So we think it's our job at Scapic to bring the camera as that middle layer between a grid of objects in the digital world, and any way that we can build more confidence with the user in any of the three areas of look, feel, and touch. Can I make it look the real deal if I place that couch in front of you? Can I give you a sense of how large the washing machine is? Or can I help you understand what the makeup that you wanted to purchase is going to look exactly on your skin tone on your face? So the moment we flip it over into a job to be done per se, we start realizing that the camera can be as useful as the feed where you're able to look at the e-commerce items that you're purchasing. And that's why we're excited about camera as a value proposition and AR as one way to unlock some of that value, as compared to only calling it an AR company or an e-commerce company per se. I think at our core, we think we can make the country buy using the camera as a first-class citizen for a surface of commerce. So how do we make that happen is really where our focus is going to be on the next few quarters at least.
How do you guys model your 3D like objects? Do you use any 3D models made by designers, or do you use RGB 3D camera to scan them, or do you use a laser profiler? If you can shed a light on that.
This is probably one of the coolest questions that can come my way. This is something
Right.
that we break our heads on here at Scapic. I think very few people have a sense or a nuance towards how difficult the 3D problem is.
Yeah.
Now, it's easy for us to say AR is going to change the world, VR is going to change the world. These are big bets that the FANG companies are doing. The next 10 years is going to be nothing like the last 10. Cool, right? Like you got your TechCrunch articles and your Times of India articles sorted, but
Yeah.
at its very core, right? When you skin the cat, you notice that any format of AR, VR content to work needs 3D, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything needs
Yeah.
a 3D shift or an interpretation in spatial areas or in a spatial sense for it to make sense, for it to work. The problem is the couch that you bought, the table that you're buying, or any product, including the gaming chair that we possibly might want, is while it has some 3D angles to it, today the world is not built to capture 3D information reliably, easily, and at a accuracy that is useful. For example, you have a moment in front of you where there is a good, cool-looking car by the streets, and you want to capture that memory. The concept of capturing a memory is inherently 2D right now. You pick up your phone, you grab a picture, but the picture is inherently 2D. You don't capture space, not yet. That means that so far the world has been architected around storing and preserving information predominantly in a 2D medium. Now, we suddenly flip that over and we say, look, it's 3D or nothing. So that's a real problem, right? So there are three ways to solve this. The first way to solve it is grid, spit, and duct tape. Like just throw enough humans at it. There are enough 3D modeling software that's out there. Hand model everything from scratch in case you have to. Sometimes you don't have a choice, right? Like just to get started, to kickstart the industry, you possibly just do the grunt work and hand model everything from scratch all over again. The second approach is possibly using a technique that is called photogrammetry, where you're able to utilize a sequence of images that can be sort of put into a photogrammetry software to give you a point cloud. Basically, to sort of demystify this, photogrammetry is a technique where, let's say, there's a clay pot in front of us. We walk around the clay pot and grab pictures in very specific intervals. Let's say I capture the clay pot facing right in front of it. I then shift myself by 5 degrees, take the second picture. Another 5 degrees, take the third picture. I come on a 360 all around the clay pot. Now I have a bunch of images that I can throw into a specific software that is capable of photogrammetry reconstruction. Now that will understand what's the overlap between one picture to the other and be able to reconstruct or reverse engineer a 3D model and provide it to you. So photogrammetry is very useful in a very contained environment, almost like a studio setup, per se, right? Where I can have cameras operating in a very deliberate way in order to give you the output that you want. The third mechanism, which is probably far more recent, is what we call as a time of flight sensor, or what you would have found in your most recent iPhones as LiDAR.
LiDAR. Yeah.
So a LiDAR sensor is basically throwing infrared dots around the 3D object and capturing that information real time as 3D information. The sensor is built to capture 3D information, which means that now you're able to reconstruct everything around you at a resolution level in entire high fidelity 3D. Now we think this is very exciting because this is generation one of this technology right now. It's already starting to come in your smartphones. A couple of iterations moving forward, when you click a picture, you're not going to just capture a picture, but also capture a significant amount of 3D information from anything that you take. So imagine if Google Maps is possibly not just able to show you a flat lay of the way that your world is operating at, but a complete digital twin or a 3D representation of the world, the kind of things that you'll be able to do on top of it. So capturing spatial data is not just useful in e-commerce, it's huge in e-commerce, but we think other use cases like self-driving cars, mapping, as well as say industrial use cases in terms of understanding how factory floors can be optimized better, or even warehousing can be made better by running simulations on a digital twin. The whole concept of 3D capture has started to become fast, cheap, and accessible in your smartphone itself. And we know what happened the last time when a good camera came on a smartphone. So many new business opportunities open up, right? From a social movement to an enterprise movement. That's really the opening up of the playing field of a whole new format of content itself.
Moving on from the technology to the recent events that has happened in the last couple of months. Flipkart, give us details like what happened, why happened, how.
2020 for most people, everyone is going to have their own colorful adjectives. For me, it was cat and mouse. Let me put it that way, right? The ability in order for you to go through an M&A at a startup is almost like a roller coaster. It's a mini roller coaster on top of the roller coaster. Let me put it that way, right? We definitely had a lot of fun. We learned a lot, but it was backbreaking in order to ensure that the process is sort of done. There are 100 variables in terms of exiting an org and ensuring that it's an exit that everybody finds as a great outcome. Because at the end of the day, when you sign on to a journey, you're not signing on with the destination in mind, but more for the journey per se. But when there is a destination, you need to make a very conscious call as to, do you see this as the best point of time to exit a company? Do you see this org going to a much greater distance independently or with the presence of a larger org? For us, we believe that with the kind of support and with the kind of belief as well as the vision that Flipkart brings to the table in terms of how important the camera is for them across the e-commerce process and their growth across tier 2 and tier 3 India, or Bharat as we call it, as the next 200 million odd shoppers. This is for the first time that we can take a feature that's not laggy, but rather be one of the first across the world to incorporate a whole new feature for a part of the country that's always been getting features only after 2 years, 2.5 years, 3 years, when the rest of the world gets it together at. And that was a kind of value unlock that we could not, and startups in general might not be able to achieve in independent strife. Right? So for us, the first part of the journey was making the decision: is Flipkart or is exiting the right thing in the first place? The answer started to come to yes, purely because of the impact, the time to impact, and the resources that it takes to cause that impact. Right? Deep tech is a capital intensive game, and you really want to ensure that you're not penny wise, pound foolish in terms of deploying that capital to build use cases that are of deep value.
Yeah, I
The
mean, it is
second part,
very encouraging in the first place to have deep tech startups in Indian ecosystem. Not many are there, right?
that's a whole conversation for one
Yeah,
more part of this.
yeah,
We
Building
are
a deep
totally
tech startup in India
on
is
it.
like chewing on glass. Like it is genuinely like chewing on glass, to a point where after a period of time you just get used to how bad it is. Right? Like we're definitely in very early stages of building a deep tech ecosystem in India, let alone something that a whole outlook towards having research first startups to be out there. I think today, even if you are a deep tech startup, there is an over indexed amount of importance in cracking that business model, the go to market, and everything that a traditional SaaS play or a B2B play is held accountable to. So if you're building a deep tech startup, don't think that you're going to get away by not having the metrics to show for it, right? In
Yeah.
fact, it's the other way around. You're judged no different from every other startup that's out there. The brownie points on the deep tech exists if you thump your chest often enough about it, but they're brownie points. They're not really what's going to win you the next check, if I were to say so.
Okay.
and I must say, like, a lot of street creds goes to Flipkart here because they are the one who's done this like mature move of bringing in technology at such a right point, I must say. I mean, I believe you guys have been able to demonstrate it reasonably well for a couple of thousands of people that the technology works reasonably well, and from there going on, not like leapfrogging all the way to now millions of users on a platform such big, and they going deep into it at this point in time says a lot about it, a lot about them also, right?
For sure. This was something which was a little bit of my third point, which was in an average room or in a quorum, we found it exceptionally difficult to find a more high IQ bunch than what we were able to have with the leadership at Flipkart. The ability to think a bet not in short term, but in order to extrapolate it out over a half a decade view, look at where the world is moving, look at where the country is moving, and hence where the technology stack must move, really had us think in a very different way about what we were up to. Number one. Number two was the sheer amount of belief that tech and good tech is a moat, and a superior product is a better way in order to win the war as compared to any other lever like capital, is really where we thought the team was far more opinionated about how technology can be deployed as compared to anything else. And in this, what that meant was we had a great deal champion in Sriram Iyer, who happens to be the vice president at Flipkart and takes care of user acquisition and retention as its entire function and unit. And you really require that belief from the inside to sort of stem through no matter what, right? And I lucked out in having some of my best conversations with Sriram as well as in when we got started, with the intent in order to possibly launch it in accordance to Flipkart's scale and platform, so on and so forth. What meandered from there was the M&A conversation per se. But I think some of these deals end up happening purely because of what you launch and the kind of results and synergies that you witness post that launch. And if you would possibly have a deal champion on the inside who's willing to take that patient long-term view in terms of seeing this organization succeed and ensuring that the ecosystem, which is the Flipkart group in itself, be better because of that, I think that's when it's much easier for all of us to pull the trigger, because we know what is the value in associating with the Flipkart group on this. And Flipkart is able to find immediate short term, but also very long term benefits in terms of making this happen. So it's like the way I look at it. It's a lot of urgency on the short term, but significant patience on the long term in terms of making this play work.
Sure,
Up
Pratham.
until a couple of years back, maybe a decade or two back, the ball was usually in startups court, in the sense of the word, meaning that there was a lot of fair amount of creative thinking and agility and smart moves that were being made by startups. Uh, Largely also because the incumbents a decade or two back were relatively slow moving, slower paced tax collector in their in the sense of the word. But now there is a lot of smart money that has gone into mature startups or incumbents in this age. Like maybe a Facebook would be now an incumbent in sorts, or Flipkart would be an incumbent in sorts when it comes to this industry. So, what would you say is the life of a startup in that sense? MSQRD is probably the best acquisition in the whole AR/VR space in the last decade, right?
Right.
And the gains are already being realized by Facebook. You probably will turn out to be a good success story for Flipkart down the road. But if Scapic would have been standalone, probably it might have been more of a struggle than a win, at least in the shorter term. What do you say on that?
Right. It's about the battle sweep, isn't it? Which is inevitably, I think, when we look at the ecosystem of company building, it's very often that dark looming arch that your only success or your only way out is possibly a FANG company gobbling you up, which is arithmetically correct, right? Which at this point, the the big 5 to 8 odd companies globally, from your Facebook, Apple's, Amazon's, Google's, Microsoft's, Salesforce's, they end up making the largest volume of moves in a startup acquisitive interest per se. Now, while that is true, I think the smaller fish getting eaten by the bigger fish is a very important mechanism or cog in the wheel to help the pond stay afloat or keep alive, right? The ability for a startup to engineer an exit no matter what, which is non IPO in nature, is a huge bonus to ensuring that there is money that can be parked in startups which are outrageous bets, right? If a Masquerade or an MSQRD had to, the only way that company would have been successful was to list itself in the NASDAQ, then we are talking about a fairly difficult proposition. Some orgs might not be built for independent path to IPO, right? And in the deep tech space, we have only very recently, with electric cars and self-driving technology, started to even realize that a SPAC or a direct listing is even possible at the moment. Now, before this, deep tech IPOs were almost none. Right. Over the last 2 years, you've got in the biology side and Impossible Foods. With respect to self-driving, you've got a couple of direct listings that are going forward. Of course, you have a Tesla, but those are outliers on top of outliers, which means you require a robust M&A ecosystem to foster the kind of capital that early stage deep tech companies might require on one side. On the other side, when we quickly move to a non-deep tech sort of startup, I think the grass is fairly lush. What do I mean by that? Is it's a great point of time to be building companies in the SaaS space in specific domains where you don't need to either replicate a search engine or an operating system provider, but continue to build something of value that you can inevitably scale to the first $10 million in ARR, and then subsequently from there freewheel into multiple other products to bring it to life. A very
Like a
recent
Freshworks
example,
or a Salesforce.
right? Or even go smaller, right? Think of an intercom.com, right? Where it started off as a messaging service which helps customers connect with a website through a simple floating action button.
Yeah.
Now, that company today, while it started off with a very narrow niche and value proposition, has now offered onboarding, has offered carousels and ways to display information out to your customers, has offered README as well as documentation and search and retrieval in order to move that forward. And today sits at a company market cap, which is over $2 billion, and subsequently looking for an IPO themselves. A Canva at the end of the day, right? There is always an incumbent threat that you're going to possibly have a Facebook make replicating a Canva, you're going to have an Adobe replicating a Canva. But as long as you're approaching a large enough market, you can even make an email client fairly successful. And Superhuman has possibly taught us that, which is at $330 million in their possible last private round of valuation. It's clear that there is still enough room in order to build meaningful companies at a meaningful scale without necessarily being demotivated by the fact that a FANG exit is possibly one of the more realistic ways to get out there.
Yeah. So just continuing on this thread for maybe a minute more.
Please.
What would have been the path for Scapic if this acquisition would not have been on the table? What was your next step, and what were the next 5 years would have looked like? How different would that been?
Very interesting. Yeah. Our decision making tree has, we sort of made it, what do we know we can control, what do we don't know, and what we can't control. It was a simple 2x2 matrix that we started with. Now, the things that we know and we can control is a use case for a specific industry at a certain dollar value that we can go from 1 mil ARR to 2 mil, 2 mil to 5 mil, 5 mil to 8 mil. Right? Like that's a trajectory that we can draw and hope that we execute well. Now, what we don't know is possibly on how quickly is the space going to hockey stick, right? And when does a space hockey stick? A space can hockey stick for a multitude of reasons. A space can hockey stick because Apple launches a new device. A space can hockey stick because a new machine learning approach made this significantly easier. A space can hockey stick because someone decided to throw Pokeballs in when their camera is open and now everyone's going around the city doing it.
Yeah.
These you don't have too much control over, right? You can choose to be the hockey stick moment yourself, saying, I will make the change happen. It's a fairly courageous move because the outliers to success or the probabilistic nature of you causing that impact all by yourself as a small independent entity is a tough job. So now you have things that you can't control and things that you can control. And in between this, you have other variables like how does the competitive landscape evolve? Or what if tomorrow, more than e-commerce, edtech evolves faster? Which means that you now have to constantly keep adjusting your rudder as you continue to build this organization through it. So over the next 5 years, if Scapic had stuck it through, for if I may say so, I think it would have been across in the trifecta between what a good SaaS company could be, a beachhead market in e-commerce and where it could move forward at, and then eventually a second larger TAM that would start to emerge through, which could be in the social space, the education space, or a third space that we simply don't even know enough about today. Because when you look back at the industry 5 years ago, 2015 ARBR, to what we are or where we are right now, the one thing that has consistently proven itself out is false positives or false starts are one of the most active ways that this industry has tripped on itself. So this time around, we wanted to approach it with a sense of skepticism, which is what is it going to take to make our next big bet foolproof in terms of making or causing impact? The largest variable to that answer is nothing of what I mentioned to you so far, but users, right? The largest variable to causing impact in this scenario was the very fact that you need a place of a catchment of more than 100 million people shopping in this country. Now, that is a variable we can control, a variable we know enough of, and a product that we can cater to. That answer then became a lot clearer and easier for us, saying, choose to control your destiny as compared to hoping that over a period of time the dots would somehow connect per se, which they might. But I think it's always easier to steer the ship as compared to hope that the tides are going to be easy on you.